Caribbean integration is necessary for the future of small island states. Apart from that, we also learned yesterday from the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, that Attorney Generals from across CARICOM member states will meet to finally push forward the agenda of free movement of CARICOM citizens amongst member islands. So let's just expand on this a bit to see whether or not CARICOM really is working as intended or is serving the purpose as it should. I'm joined by a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Campus in Political Sciences, Mr. Yuvan Das. He's with us virtually. Hello, sir. Welcome to the program.
Morning. Welcome, everyone.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the program. So, as I said, broadly speaking, CARICOM's real purpose is Caribbean integration. Is it currently living up to the principles upon which it was instituted?
Well, I would say yes and no, because there are certain policies that could have been enacted sooner, and I would say policy coordination towards the regional integration purpose, freedom of movement, and other regional transportation, tariff removals, and embargo systems could have been done earlier, especially towards economic integration and to form a political union. And we are lacking behind on those fronts.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that sense, as we've been hearing within recent times, the push for a regional ferry service, we've learned of one within the private sector that already has been put in place, and now we're hearing one amongst the various member states within the Caribbean as well to launch a regional ferry service. But then we're also learning of a push to ensure that there's a freedom of movement amongst people. Listen, CARICOM was enacted in 1973. Why do you suppose that it's taken so long for us to get to this point?
Well, there are certain problems with regional integration in the region. Since the 1960s, when the Federation failed, there was a lack of political coordination. There was a lack of, buying into removing sovereignty and giving up a certain leeway towards economic policies and political policies. So that still exists to an extent today. The region has not fully opened up to the fact that we need to sacrifice some level of sovereignty to gain headway into coordination efforts towards regional integration. So external relations between our islands, should have been developed sooner. And all of the efforts towards the skill certificate that we have to allow persons to move from island to island should have been enacted sooner. We were not part of the table discussion at that point in time and agreed on all the standards that need to be met, especially, the promotion of legal frameworks to support laws and developments for freedom of movement. Now we're hearing that it's on the table again. Let's see how it works, because in the past, we had some level of travel and integration, but it's not fully enacted. We're hearing that it's going to be fully enacted after this discussion, but I don't think that, it might happen as soon as we think.
Mm-hmm. Now, that issue of sovereignty, has it really affected the purpose of CARICOM? Has that been possibly the more probable reason as to why CARICOM has not been fully implemented within Caribbean member states?
It's one of the main reasons. Encroaching on our island sovereignty and, informing policies at a regional level has its advantages and disadvantages. And I think that a lot of the reasons, it's a lack of, coordination. It's a lack of strengthening of the institutions' capacity that we share regional basis with. So regional institutions based on agriculture, health, tourism needs capacity building. It needs strengthening so that we can create that coordination policy to work effectively. So sovereignty itself is one factor. It's funding, it's cultural clashes, it's the ability to adapt to funding, to which island is equitably associated with the requisite amount of funding that they need to develop these policies, because that's one of the reasons why the Federation failed. Some of the islands felt that they were going to give more in terms of economics than the other smaller islands. So the contribution was not equitable. So part of it still exists today. How do we share the responsibility of these regional integration efforts? And if you look at the conundrum now with the new ferry system, who's going to foot the bill? And which island is going to pay more to maintain the route, to maintain the ferry? What about if something happens and it breaks down? Are we going to share responsibility and foot the bill?
Mm-hmm. Now, sorry, continue.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and if we take a look at the West Indian Federation and what led to its collapse versus the issues within CARICOM, how is it that CARICOM has been able to survive up until this point? It's been able to withstand the pressures that, were associated with the collapse of the West Indian Federation.
Right, because after the collapse, we have been able to move forward towards several collaborations. Those collaborations have not crossed our sovereign borders in terms of enacting policy frameworks to synchronize and allow for policies to affect national sovereignty just yet. It's only accompanied by cooperation. So I think that the islands have been very slow in this delivery when compared to other economic unions such as the EU and other upcoming economic unions that we are seeing across the world. So the trade organizations, the removal of certain tariffs, the balance of trade, the trade establishment and the movement of goods and services are just on the rise right now. We are not fully integrated back into that union, that it would be economic or political. So we're slow to the draw right now, and that's why it's been moving at this pace. We're not fully there yet. So,
are you seeing efforts though to try and hasten that? Are you seeing a push, whether it be from one particular member state or a few or all? Are there examples to show that there is progress, or at least continuous progress, whether it be slow, whether it be quicker than previously, to show that this is happening, it's in the works?
Yes. So there are efforts that CARICOM initiated through CSME and the development of regional institutions for capacity building and capacity strengthening. So economic disparities, sure. We have, regional health institutions that we have been using for COVID, telecommunications, stock markets, and things like that. Now we are looking into transport and movement of labor. So we have seen certain shared elements amongst CARICOM member states towards that advancement, but it has been slow, and we need to pick up pace.
Mm-hmm. In terms of economic integration, and I'm pushing now that topic of CSME in particular, since 1989, governments have agreed to push forward with economic integration, and there are so many tenets associated with that, whether it be monetary fiscal policies, tax systems, for example, and even you gave the example of tariffs. But has CSME been a failure associated with CARICOM? That's a very powerful word, failure, when it comes to even describing these institutions. But since 1989, economic integration was agreed upon. We can say it's slow, but CSME has not been fully enacted at all.
There's a lot of merit in that statement that you made in terms of failure, but I can't say a total failure, because that would be discrediting the entire drive towards an economic union. We haven't reached an economic union yet, because that would mean a synchronization of all policies throughout the region towards a more federal system where a body would be created and, economic tariffs, economic policies, trade policies, together with sharing of information, and also, customs negotiations and harmonizations of policies for trade and development would be agreed upon and harmonized by all member countries. So if you're saying that, we, since 20 plus years, we are not there yet, yes, I would say that is a failure on our part to not establish those economic agreements to the union. And I think that we need to move forward with it as soon as possible, because there are a lot of benefits that could come with being an economic union and trading as one economic bloc together with international influence. I mean, we could even establish to the point that if we get there soon enough, we can have talks about a one currency for CARICOM. I mean, it's far-fetched yet because we haven't reached that point, but that would severely impact our ability to trade internationally and regionally, because the currency to which strength and the amount of countries joined in CARICOM would be equivalent to that of the US dollar. Now, that's an average, right? So if we do that, we can have a significant stance in trade development and also a world forum towards advancement in trade as an economic bloc and union. And we can even move further as a political union where we share policies and development strategies as a member states. But that would severely encroach upon sovereignty, but the benefits would outweigh that ability to move towards sovereignty.
Is it really far-fetched though? Because the example right around the corner is the OECS, which could be deemed as a success when you compare it to CARICOM. So is it really as far-fetched as we think?
Well, you do the math. So much plus years, and we have not gotten there yet. So what's to get us to that level? Cooperation, cultural clashes, removal of sovereign borders and barriers, together with political cooperation and the willingness to move forward. This has not resonated with all the islands yet. I'm seeing that, different CARICOM meetings where the leaders would agree on certain items. But, this table discussion hasn't been there yet to, into fruition. So, yes, I would say somewhat far-fetched. And we can look at the EC and the OECS, and we could look at these institutions as successes, but we are not there yet. So we need to develop our framework for policies. We need to cooperate and harmonize and synchronize our efforts towards regional integration to a greater extent than we are right now, to have that end goal in mind. And until we do that, we're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Now, is Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, two islands as examples, have dominated intra-regional trade in terms of exporting their products to other islands in the Caribbean? In fact, even the Jamaica Manufacturers Association a couple of years ago were questioning why is it that CARICOM exists, but they still could not get concessions on oil and gas products that were being exported from Trinidad and Tobago. And that was a major issue in Jamaica. Has a turbulent economic and social environment inhibited intra-regional trade and only allowed for bigger players such as Trinidad and Tobago to dominate these markets, which are seen as a disadvantage to other islands?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of these smaller islands don't have, as much in terms of trade and development and GDP as Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados and Jamaica. But it leaves them at a certain disadvantage, yes. But at the same time, with an economic union, they will be put on the playing field as well. So if we get to that stage, they will have certain benefits. But yes, as it stands right now, some Caribbean countries are at an advantage economically versus others that don't have the amount of, products, I should say, oil and natural gas to foot the bill and to give it a higher GDP in terms of facilitating trade, and also looking at other product development and diversification, because some smaller islands only rely on a certain amount of exports for fruits and certain products and tourism. So yes, they will be at a disadvantage when it comes to trade.
Has the Caribbean is often, we refer to the Caribbean and we refer to us as all being one Caribbean. And again, that goes back to CARICOM and CARICOM's purpose. But you cannot ignore the fact that there is so much diversity amongst people within the Caribbean. The people of the Caribbean equals to a grand amount of diversity. Is that an issue? Is that a problem in itself, that too much diversity could be affecting CARICOM and CSME?
To an extent, because diversity and heterogeneity stems along our historical lines, from slavery and indentureship and extreme migration, together with the indigenous that was on the island. So we in the Caribbean diaspora have a lot of diverse views in terms of religion, cultural elements, and other norms and value systems that make us unique. So cultural element with St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Jamaica and Barbados in terms of caste and secularization together with social stratification are different. The norms are different, the value systems are different. So I could understand why there would be some hesitancy or some disparity between harmonization policies with different diaspora. So there's a common occurrence amongst trade and negotiations and development, but it should not be when it comes to cooperation, because we benefit from it. So that small element of diaspora should not be a deciding factor to hinder cooperation, economic and political, that is, but it is to an extent a small factor, yes.
Well, Mr. Das, again, going back to what CARICOM speaks about as a region, as you've mentioned earlier, a trading bloc, an economic bloc, a union, so that is associated with regionalism. All in all, I'm not doubting there have been efforts. Again, even we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday about AGs across the Caribbean meeting to push on these plans for free movement of citizens of CARICOM member states. But apart from that, is there an argument that suggests that the spirit of regionalism in itself is possibly fading?
All right. I don't want to use the words feeling.
Not failing, not failing, but fading. It's weakening. It's becoming less and less. Yeah.
Okay, fading. Okay, yes. I would say that we are on the increase, on the front burner, so to speak, when it comes to regional integration. That I see governments are trying to push different efforts towards regional integration, and I admire that. But what I'm not seeing is the commitment to the deeper requisite of trade, the deeper requisite of movement. So we're hearing that they're going to, but then are they putting it into policy and action where they can create a strategic plan to develop a framework? I'm not seeing that. So I would say because of that fact, yes, I would say there's a certain degree towards fading in terms of economic integration and political integration.
Mm-hmm. So as we're concluding this conversation this morning, in your thoughts and opinions, and given that you've studied this, what do you suppose is the way forward for a successful CARICOM and a successful CSME?
Right. First thing is that topic of sovereignty. We need to be open to our borders, our policies, our frameworks, and our economic policies in particular, to be controlled by a regional entity, to be set up and harmonized by all members of CARICOM. We also need to have openness for cultural diversity. We need to strengthen our institutions to build on the fact that economic integration should develop a level of trust and harmony between our institutions. We need to look at a greater extent towards regional transportation, not just amongst Barbados and Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, and I've learned that they want to add Suriname to the route. But there are other member states, and we need to think about that as well, and how trade is going to affect those member states when only a certain amount of islands are going to be interconnected now. So we need to have more trade development for tariffs and embargoes, removals, in order to enact trade policies to be more efficient. We need to have more awareness of regional policies, and the citizens need to get on board with it and not have this conflict with other islands, in terms of which products are better or which products are cheaper. We need to harmonize all of those to make it more effective. I think Guyana was going to contribute about $2 million to the National Relief Fund for the Caribbean for natural disasters. Mm-hmm. That's a good head start in terms of a regional body to mitigate natural disaster and funding elements towards it. And that is a step in the right direction, but it needs to be harmonized by all and contributed to by all member states in order for it to be fully effective. So these elements in CARICOM are just some of the efforts towards what we need to do and how we need to do it. It's going to be very difficult for us to do so, but we need to wrap our heads around it and get the program going, get strategic planning, get regulatory frameworks. All of these things have to be done in order for us to make any headway. And the governments have to agree on all, because remember when Jamaica pulled out of the Federation, William said that 1 from 10 is not.
Yes.
I mean, that if we can't all come together and cooperate with these policies and frameworks, then we are not going to do so in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah.
I was just asking, in terms of strategic planning and sustainable development, do you think that vision, that shared vision of 25% by 2025, you're reducing our regional food import bill of 25% by 2025, is a good example to lean on?
Yes, it's a good example, but achievable, cooperation, and the attainable in terms of resources. I think we have a lot to work towards. And I think the region could learn, from diversification to more green energy, fuel-sufficient sources, like Barbados would have been pushing for quite some time now. Trinidad and Tobago needs to get on board with that. We have, but we are not fully there yet. Trinidad and Tobago had a green paper sometime, I think, in 2011. And we have not actually formalized a framework for renewable energy in the way that we should up until this day. Now, we have had talks about it and scheduled meetings about it, but the framework is not there yet, together with a lot of other regional islands in this regard. So we have a lot to do with it. And we're missing a big picture towards integration and technology now with the introduction of AI into systems, because that can have a significant impact in our ability to manage public organizations, public sector reform initiatives towards assisting CARICOM and CSME to develop to a greater extent. So we need to move forward with technology as well to have a greater impact in terms of how we integrate and how we trade and how we move from island to island. It has a lot to do with shared knowledge and telecommunications, ICT developments, that some countries are somewhat far ahead when compared to other Caribbean islands. So that needs to level the playing field as well. And we need to help our neighboring islands develop the capacity for technology and advancement in order for us to move forward as one unit.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Das, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning and for the extensive conversation. Of course, if we were to dive into CARICOM and CSME, it will take hours upon hours to have that full discussion. But for the time that you've shared with us this morning, thank you so much, sir.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
All the very best. Keep well. Yuvan Das, lecturer in political sciences at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, joining me on AM Prime this morning. So when it comes to asking the question as to whether or not CARICOM is fulfilling its mandate as was instituted, broadly speaking, regional integration, Caribbean integration, the answers go both ways, yes and no. And there are examples and arguments that can be made for both sides. More particularly, progress has been slow. It's been very, very slow. But there are issues to be sorted. and let us see where it goes. CARICOM has not fallen apart as yet. It's being propped up. Let's see if it's really worth it in the end game. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime, and when we return, we'll get into some more conversations. We'll be right back.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. And this part of the conversation goes back to what I suppose could be deemed as a mini-series as we speak about our coral reefs and their ecosystems, well, globally. But of course, as we're of Tobago, the Caribbean as a whole has a lot to offer. So coral research actually helps us have a greater understanding of the systems and the biodiversity, but it has also revealed just how vulnerable such systems are and exactly what needs to be done to save them. Now, the individual who has been very vocal about this and who joins me once more on AM Prime is Dr. Anjani Ganesh, a coral reef ecologist at the Institute of Marine Affairs. She joins us virtually. Hello, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, thanks so much for joining us once more. So, in reading your latest contribution to the conversation, you pointed out, firstly, that the University of Queensland, Australia, they've been able to map over, well, close to 350,000 square kilometers of coral reefs. How has this mapping, this research, been a useful tool, in terms of management, conservation, and understanding of the coral reef ecosystems and their biodiversity?
So I think that the mapping of the technology of the satellite technology is helping us to get a broader and in some cases a deeper understanding of where our reefs are. So if you track back to when we first started to dive, the reefs that were being dived were based on dive sites for recreational use or for exploration. And that was limited by the air in your tank. So how far a diver can get, how deep they can go, they would be able to map those reefs to that extent. And now we have satellite technology that can span the globe and be able to use its sensors to detect a much larger area of coral reefs. And as those sensors get better, as they get sharper, as we have the tools to detect the changes of the color patterns and the textures of the imagery, we can now be able to map at a more precise scale and at a larger area, essentially.
Does this mapping, is it limited to depths? Could it go to depths or the limits to such?
Yes, definitely, and that's a great question. While the satellites have increased our spatial awareness of where the reefs occur around the world, we still are limited because it's a satellite image and the image cannot penetrate beyond a certain depth with the color changes in the water column. And so reefs below 30 meters still have to be mapped using other technology. So whether it is ROVs or underwater drones, and using other sort of innovative tools like eDNA, which is what I mentioned in the article, where you collect water samples of DNA that has been shed from organisms to give you an idea of the communities that are present in different areas.
The eDNA, what does that stand for? I'm sorry?
Environmental DNA.
Right.
So we shed a lot of DNA in our environment. Everything around us that's alive sheds cells, and right now we have the technology to be able to use that in that limited concentration to identify the communities around us.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ganesh, are there different types of coral reefs, different types of corals, of course, but are there different types of reefs?
100%. So reefs are classified by their environment. So mesophotic reefs, they occur between 30 meters and 150 meters depth. So meso meaning middle, photic meaning light. So it's a middle or low light environment, because you have aphotic, which is no light, and coral reefs cannot grow in that environment. And then you have shallow reefs where you have high light environments. And so light is one example of a changing environment which changes the types of reefs and how we can classify reefs. But you have reefs that are classified based on wave environments where certain corals can grow, certain corals can't grow. So I like to think of reefs like snowflakes. Every reef is shaped by the environment around it, and every reef is unique to some extent.
Well, if you've said that mesophotic reefs are a sort of the middle ground, they have coral reefs that are blooming beyond 150 meters?
They are coral reefs, but they grow without the presence of light. So they're deep sea reefs that grow in the absence of light, and they grow very, very slowly, but they still have a very critical role in providing habitat for organisms in the deep ocean. And I'm talking about, much deeper than where you have the mesophotic zone. So light penetrates perhaps between 150 and maybe to I'd say 300 meters of the top part of the ocean, but there you have thousands of meters below that have the majority of the ocean, which is without light. And you do get corals that grow on the bottom of the ocean. It takes, thousands of years to get to a certain size. They grow very slowly, and it's a very difficult area, as you can imagine, to study and to understand.
I think it's still incredible to learn that they are still existing beyond 150 meters, because all that's been taught us about coral reefs and the importance of the temperature of the water and the sunlight penetrating the water, and that's rather incredible. But then it also, mesophotic reefs, it fascinates me even more. And you've actually focused a lot on mesophotic reefs in your articles. Why are they important in particular?
Well, I was personally fascinated because my former supervisor, he studied mesophotic reefs. So he had the technology and the tools, and he would go diving for very short periods of time to collect genetic information of those corals. And I think the idea that he had was that mesophotic reefs can potentially be a refuge for climate change because the waters are generally cooler. You have some species that can occur in the shallow reefs and in the mesophotic areas. And so when the shallow areas get bleached and impacted with mortality, there can be some reseeding from that mesophotic sites. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is that refuge that refuge theory is becoming we're seeing the deep being impacted just as much as the shallow areas. And so there may be pockets of refuge, but it all depends on how severe the changes in climate are.
Well, we've often spoken about changes in climate, but what is most intriguing now is how neighboring environments can actually impact upon coral reefs, and how the health of a coral reef could also impact upon neighboring environments. And one such example that you've spoken about is the relationship between seabirds and coral reefs. And I thought it was quite amazing. Could you please expand a bit more on what we've learned thus far between seabirds and coral reefs?
Yes, for sure. I thought it was a very interesting study that was done in the Chagos archipelago in the Indian Ocean. So if you can imagine, this archipelago is a series of inhabited and uninhabited islands. And the researchers, they looked at uninhabited islands, but they compared islands that were infested with rats because of human transport and commerce, and islands that were free of rats. And a lot of these islands are also seabird colonies. So you have the seabird colonies on the land, and then you have the coral reefs that sort of fringe the islands. And what they realized is that there was a relationship that was built up between the seabird colonies and the coral reefs, a beneficial one, where the guano, or the bird poop, of the seabirds would add nutrients to the water column and sort of feed, in a sense, or provide, essential nutrients for the corals to grow and whatnot. In areas on islands where the rats infested, unfortunately, it decimated the bird population. And what happens is that it changed that dynamic with the reefs. So they were able to see evidence of this relationship by looking at damselfish. And damselfish are unique in the sense that they don't just graze algae, they grow algae like farmers. And so they'll find a piece of dead coral, they would plant their algae, and they would tend to it. And what they found is that on rat-infested islands, the algae gardens were huge, but they were low in nutrition. So they couldn't get enough nutrition, so they had to grow more and plant more. But in the on the islands where there was a healthy, thriving bird population, the algae gardens were very small, and they were rich in nutrients. And because of that, the damselfish, they're very territorial. They were defending their little turf much more fiercely. So they saw evidence in the behavior changes of the fish, but also in the composition of the reefs, because when you have a larger turf algae gardens, it means that it's impacting on the corals, because the corals can't settle as much because there are limited areas for suitable corals to settle on. So a simple changes in the dynamics on land can have consequences in the reefs below. And we do have examples of that in the Caribbean with respect to like human activities and whatnot.
Wow, so you even link the damselfish to being farmers, where they actually grow their own algae, and then you've got manure being provided by the seabirds. It's amazing when you look at nature. You know, we're not too far apart, aren't we?
No, we're not.
No,
that's how we can learn from nature, for sure.
But do seabirds benefit or see any benefits at all when they are contributing to these coral reefs and their health? How do seabirds benefit?
Well, the seabirds, they fish off of the coral reefs. And remember, reef habitats are sort of nursery grounds and habitats for a lot of marine life. And so they get their food from the coral reefs. I'm not sure if there's a direct link circling back between the damselfish and the turf algae, but they depend on thriving reefs and healthy oceans. So it's sort of that benefit.
And what you also mentioned, which really it was a great point in the sense that damselfish, when you saw near rat-infested islands where bird populations were lower, yes, damselfish had large, algae farms, if you'd like to call it that, but they were very low in nutrients. But then when they were near to islands that were heavily populated by birds, whilst there may be smaller pockets of algae farms, they were high nutrition, and they became very territorial. So is it that these factors that you mentioned also have an impact on the way that fish behave? Does it change their behavioral patterns in any way?
For sure. I think, so damselfish are naturally territorial, so they will defend their turf. And we see it in Tobago all the time. We do we do surveys underwater, and if we come across a garden, you will have some species that will swim past your mast and try to get and nip at you and try to get away from you. But what I think the environment does is it exaggerates certain behaviors, right? So if they were aggressive before, they would probably get more aggressive if their turf gardens aren't doing well, right? Naturally, right? So and you do see that changes in behavior. I think I mentioned with the butterfly fish, as their environment changes, their behavior also changes.
Could we link that back to human beings as well? Because as I'm saying, the relationship is quite amazing when you study it. We're not that much different. I mean, even you use the example that in times of desperation, human beings will always look for the closest source of food, of shelter. It may change the way they think, the way they act, and what they seek. Is that also the case with fish and coral reefs? If the temperature changes within the waters, if the amount of sunlight reaching the waters, the nutrients within the waters, the algae farms, do we see that happening as well?
Yeah. So we have to adapt in times of needs. There's the hierarchy of needs, right? For humans, there's food, shelter, things to survive, and the same applies for marine life. So the example I give in the article is the butterfly fish. So after a coral bleaching event or a reef disaster where the structures have been lost, butterfly fish will swim further away from their home range in search of food. And in doing that, they would come across, other fish of different species that they would have conflict with. And so you'd see these conflicts increasing in times of high coral mortality because they're more desperate for seeking food out or seeking some form of nutrition. And yeah, so you do get those adaptive changes in behavior. I think, once things come back to normal, their behavior will also readjust, right? But we are seeing a lot of changes and adaptations in behavior of marine organisms, for sure.
My final question to you this morning, Dr. Ignace, is could it also lead to, perhaps an explosion in certain fish populations? We know down here we see the instance of the lionfish, and that was a huge problem. But the examples of which you've spoken about this morning, does it also explain why we are possibly seeing more and more of these species popping up everywhere, invasive species?
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's one example of where we look at where scientists have seen invasive species significantly change the ecology and the behavior of native populations. So lionfish is a good example where lionfish, they basically can engulf huge amounts of juvenile populations of fish species, which means that they're eating a lot of the juveniles of groupers, parrotfish, a lot of fish species that are important for the healthy reef environment, but also help for our commercial fish species. And so when you have an invasion like that, it is very difficult for organisms to adapt to counteract. So that's when humans need to step in to control and manage the environment so that our native populations don't get decimated. Over time, I imagine that there would be some adaptation naturally, but that time frame is way too long before any significant decimation happens.
Well, Dr. Ignace, I want to thank you so much for joining me this morning. As I mentioned at the start, it seems as though it's a bit of a mini-series in terms that we've been doing with the conversations that we've had and we are going to have. So thank you so much for joining me once more. Looking forward to the next time.
Yes, take care. My pleasure.
All the very best to you. Well, we will have more conversations, of course, on coral reef ecosystems and that biodiversity. And I'm always pleased to welcome Dr. Ignace to the program. And we thank her for her contribution. And if ever you get the opportunity, I will encourage you to even find that opportunity to follow Dr. Anjani Ignace and her columns, of which are published in the Newsday newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on WSN's AM Prime, and when we return, we'll get into more discussions this morning. We'll be right back.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. PTSC confirms bus pedestrian incident. EMA reporting a reduction in the flow of oil spill. Fire damages Toko Secondary School. Someone shooting claims the life of Lindy Aaron. Suspects at large. Now for the details. The Public Transport Service Corporation has verified an incident involving one of its buses and a pedestrian. According to PTSC, the unfortunate event occurred earlier today near the Curab Lights intersection. Emergency services were immediately dispatched to the scene and the injured individual received prompt medical attention. Our thoughts are with the affected individual and his loved ones, and we wish him a speedy recovery. The PTSC statement also confirmed an investigation has been launched into the incident. Contingency plans for students at Scarborough Secondary School and Lambro Primary School are under scrutiny after an oil spill in Tobago, as per Calvin Morris, minority leader in Tobago House of Assembly. Both schools have stayed closed since the incident. In an interview on Wednesday, Morris highlighted the importance of sufficient contingency measures, particularly for standard for students at Lambo and Lincoln, preparing for the secondary entrance assessment regarding access to learning materials. Early on Wednesday morning, a fire suspected to have been deliberately set by an intruder caused partial damage to several classrooms and the cafeteria at Toko Secondary School. The incident occurred before the start of classes, prompting notification to students and teachers about the closure of the school for the day. The exact numbers of affected classrooms and the extent of the damage remains unclear. Additionally, according to a report, items were stolen from the school cafeteria during the incident. On Wednesday night, a shooting in San Juan resulted in the death of one man. The victim has been identified as Lindy Aaron from San Juan. Aaron was reportedly engaged in a game of roulette at a mini-mart along Prisca Road around 7:20 p.m. when he was confronted by two masked individuals. The suspects fired multiple shots at Aaron before escaping in a red Nissan Note. Tragically, Aaron succumbed to his injuries at the scene. Well, that's it. News on the hour on WESN. I am Sarah Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Lord Baden-Powell was born on February 22nd, 1857. He founded Scouting in 1907. In fact, Scouting entered the shores of TNT in 1911. And we're proud to say that today we have 6 Scouting districts here in TNT. Founders Day was celebrated last week, and the message that transcended from every contributor at the Founders Day service was Scouts can make Trinidad and Tobago a better place. And in doing so, let's have a conversation of precisely their contribution to TNT's development and the development of young people here in TNT. I'm joined by National Scout Commissioner Mr. Mark Ainsley John. He's with us virtually. Hello, sir. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me. Good morning to your viewership and your listenership.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to start by quoting one of the contributors to the service last week, and that's Dr. Reverend Randall. He said, young scouts, cubs, older scouts and leaders, Scouting brings out our gifts and our talents. Could you explain exactly how it does just that?
So, at a meeting, for instance, our young people are invited to participate in several activities, and we start at the age of 7. So imagine a 7-year-old coming to a meeting and they are placed in a small group. These groups form part of the scouting experience or form part of the scout method. And through that small group interaction, a leader emerges, and young people lead young people through the activities or the scope of work that they have during the meetings. And you get to see the natural talent, the natural ability to lead from an experience like that. You know, For instance, if you place a puzzle or some sort of other activity in front of that group of young people, you're able to discern immediately the individuals that are able to participate well in achieving the goals set before them.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've heard as well at this Founders Day service was the need for more leaders in TNT. There's a lack of leadership. Scouts are being urged to do better and contribute more to TNT. How do you suppose the scouting movement in terms of contributing more to Trinidad and Tobago? We've seen that in how is that happening? How are they contributing more to TNT?
Well, every adult in scouting is a volunteer. As National Scout Commissioner, I'm a volunteer. And every other adult that works with young people in the scout movement in Trinidad and Tobago are volunteers. The call to have more individuals participate in the scout movement in terms of leadership is really a call to have other adults who are not part of the scout movement come to the organization and assist us with the development of young people. Scouting breeds leaders in that we require of our young people and our membership a certain characteristic, trustworthiness, respect for others, respect for the nation, respect for society, respect for the environment. And when we combine all of that, we're able to create the ideal individual that can go out into the society and contribute to the society. The goal of the Scout movement is to create active citizens. And an active citizen is one that contributes to the society.
Mm-hmm. How is volunteerism, though, an important part of that?
In terms of creating an a better society?
Yes, because you've mentioned that yourself as all the individuals, they are volunteers. Volunteerism seems to have a key part of this Scout movement. And how is that contributing to an active society?
Well, volunteerism is selfless. So in selflessness, the individual then makes an assertive decision, a conscious decision that they are going to, in some way, contribute to the development of the future. Our young people are going to become the leaders of tomorrow, the managers of tomorrow, the future professionals, the future workers, the future movers and shakers and drivers of the society tomorrow. And volunteers who contribute to their development get to shape our future, get to shape how these young people will think about the society and also how they will act in the society. And so the Scout movement is contributing to that by ensuring that the young people that participate with them in the Scout movement get to have a better world outlook, a better societal outlook, and a better understanding of the society, as well as the way in which society should function and should operate.
Mm-hmm. Scouting also focuses, given all that you've said thus far, really on how best these people can serve. A lot of it, this volunteerism and the spirit associated with volunteerism, is Scouts serving communities.
That is correct. That is correct. I had a conversation yesterday with a potential partner to the organization, and I shared with them that a group of young people decided to go to the Cora River in December, just before the holidays started, and clean up the river because they believed that families and young people and individuals are going to come to the Cora River during the vacation period, and they want to ensure that the river is clean for them. And that kind of service, that kind of attitude, that kind of behavior is what is entrenched, what is bred into, what is espoused by the young people and the adults of the Scout Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Scout movement globally. That selflessness that I just spoke about, that care for the citizens, that care for the environment, that care for the nation, and the well-being of others is literally what happens through the formative processes of the scouting movement, through the same badge programs that we speak about, through the same tying knots, through the same lighting fires, through the same sleeping under a tent, through the same cooking meals. Because as a small group, in the scout method, in the small groups, from the age of 7 onwards, young people have to take care of other young people, and leaders also have to take care of leaders within the scout movement. So when you have that happening at that level, that microcosm of the society in the scout movement, you're then able to translate that into your families, you're then able to translate that into your communities, and you're then able to translate that into the nation.
Mm-hmm. I want to link it back to something that you said earlier as an example with this focus on helping to clean the river and the environment near to the river. To what extent does the scouting movement, and this is just given my basic knowledge and understanding of it, is focused on sustainability and conservation of the environment?
You asked me what percent. I will answer that by saying we have included the Sustainable Development Goals as part of our program that we offer our young people. On a global level, the Scout movement has worked with the United Nations to ensure that the program offered across the globe in 172 countries speaks about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The other aspect of things is that the scout movement takes place outdoors. Scouting takes place outdoors. We refer to the outdoors as our home. And as such, we ensure that we take care of our home, because of the fact that we are always outdoors. Our program happens there. And if we want to have a comfortable space in which we can carry out our program, we need to ensure that we look after and maintain our environment. In terms of environmental activities on a daily basis, we have our young people work for an environment badge. We just signed on to participating with WASA and the Adopt a River program formally to help young people manage and clean watersheds. We have been working with the Wildfall Trust continuously in terms of ensuring that young people understand conservation and good environmental practices. We have been doing sustainability in terms of the environment by doing the United Youth and United Nations Global Alliance badges, which speaks to forestry, which speaks to water and water conservation, which speaks to recycling programs. We are pretty soon going to be working with Flying Tree Frog to launch a program where we are using recycling as a tool to help communities become more sociable. And so I would say that environmentalism is a huge part of what we do within the Scout movement.
A large part of this conversation thus far is really how Scouting has made young people better, more conscious, and even in terms of the future of Trans-Tobago. But let me ask you quite plainly, though you've explained so much thus far, what would you say are the key values of Scouts? What are the key values and principles of Scouts?
So I mentioned that we ensure that our young people understand from a very early age that they are going to contribute to the development of the society. And the key values of the organization are espoused through the law and the promise. Mm-hmm. Every scout promises to do his best, to do his duty to God, his country, and to help other people. They also promise to keep the Scout law or the Cub Scout law. And so the Cub Scout law is basically that a Cub Scout does his best, thinks of others before himself, and does a good turn every day. And when you get to the scout section, the age of scouting starts at 10 and a half and upwards. Scouts are asked to be trustworthy. Scouts are asked to be respectful. Scouts are asked to respect not just themselves, but other people. Not just people, but their possessions. And they're also asked to be loyal. They're also asked through that entire process to be courteous, to be kind, to be friendly and considerate, and to also look at people as a brother and recognize the familiarity or the familial ties that are associated with brotherhood.
So now I want to ask you, is the scouting movement here in TNT getting the necessary support? I know that you mentioned that you've signed on with various entities for, in terms of pushing the scouting movement and incorporating ideals into the scouting movement. But are you getting the necessary support here in TNT?
Well, we're an NGO, and as an NGO, we always require support. In order for us to achieve the ideals of the organization, we do require a lot of financial support. We also require a lot of material support. At this point in time, for instance, the organization is looking for a donor to supply us with some tents so that we can take young people outdoors. Recently, we wrote a proposal in which we are trying to help communities that don't have scout troops and individuals that are not able to afford the scout movement by working together with the business sector of the society as well as the government of the country to provide us with the materials so that we can say to these young people and say to these communities that don't have scouting or these families that cannot afford to participate in the scout movement, we have the materials and we will provide you with the experience. We'll provide you with the opportunity. And so, yes, we do have a lot of support as it relates to getting, program and activities done. But we also need quite a bit of support as it relates to the financial aspect of things, but also material aspect of things. A tent is $700. One of my fervent desires is actually to have a conversation with as many business organizations or corporations or businesses in Trinidad and Tobago and indicate to these businesses, this is the amount that it takes to put a young person through the scout movement. We would like you to go to a scout troop or come to the national organization and say to us, we would give you this money to take one young person through the scout movement. It would help. It will help us to achieve our goals in terms of developing the society, but it will also help us achieve our goals as it relates to creating better citizens and creating a much more peaceful society, a much more tolerant society, a much more involved society in terms of its young people and adults in communities.
How have such conversations gone thus far, though, in terms of your approach to corporate entities or even to government entities? How has that approach been thus far? Are you getting the response that you are seeking?
Yes, we are. We have been very strategic as it relates to our operations. We have been very strategic as it relates to, our management of the organization. You mentioned that we have 6 districts now. 3 years ago, we had 21. And we had to be very honest about ourselves as a movement and honest about ourselves in our communities and recognize that we must change our mode of operation in terms of the business of the organization and its management. And so as National Scout Commissioner, I've led the thrust to ensure that our viability is maintained and that we are able to show the businesses, we are able to show the government that we are actually doing what we say we're doing with the young people and the adults of our communities. Our social media is replete with instances in which the Scout movement has done what it said it's done. Our most recent partnership, of which I'm very grateful, was with Restaurant Holdings Limited. They came on board as a sponsor, and they supplied the organization with meals to ensure that at the same Founders Day celebrations, our young people were able to have something to eat after a parade or an outdoor event. But also Restaurant Holdings recognized that, the Scouts have been contributing to the environment. The Scouts have been contributing to the people of the society, and we are joining you in Founders Day in a celebration to recognize this contribution and give to the young people and the adults present, including the parents, these meals and say thank you for that. SM Jalil and Company came on as well, and they supplied drinks for the event in South, and they also did that as a thank you to the Scouts and to the organization, but also in partnership with the organization. Because it would have meant that we would have had to foot the bill, we would have had to find the funding to supply meals as well as to supply drinks and other water refreshments to give to the participants at these activities that we had over the weekend. So yes, we are getting the support. The organization has been truthful and honest to itself and taken a very introspective look at its business operations and at its management, and has changed a lot of the things that we have to do on a daily basis to ensure the viability of the organization and its actions. And in so doing, we have been getting a lot of support from the business sector and from the government.
Now, Mr. John, we don't have much time left. So my final question to you is, what is your vision, your hopes for the Scouting movement here in TNT as National Commissioner?
As National Scout Commissioner, I have indicated that I want to ensure that we as a movement give young people the best experience possible as it relates to adventure, the outdoors, working together with others. And the Scout movement is that organization that can do so. The sense of high adventure, going out there and camping and sleeping under the stars, the sense of participating with others to achieve good for others. We have that is literally my hope and expectation of the Scout movement. Let us build a society that is strong, let us build a society that is resilient, and let us build a society that is kind, caring, and trustworthy through the members of the Scout movement, but also through giving all of these activities that we do to young people in general and to their families in general.
Well, Mr. John, I want to thank you so very much for joining me on the program this morning and for expanding a bit more on the Scouting movement so people have a better understanding and we can encourage more young people to become involved in the Scouting movement. So in doing so, how can people get in contact with the Scout movement here in TNT?
Sure, and I just want to add to your statement there. Let's encourage young people and adults to get involved in the Scout movement. There are some adults who have not participated in the movement at all, and the movement is open to ensuring that we can have those young people and adults participate in Scouting. To get in touch with us, you can send us a message on all our social media. Everything is Scouts TT. You could also give us a call directly at 624-7271. We're always open to having contacts with our society and everyone in our society to help us contribute to creating a better world.
Well, thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning, Mr. John, and I look forward to the next conversation. All the very best to you and to the Scout movement.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, sir. All the very best. Well, I'll actually end that conversation from a quotation by the founder of the Scout movement, and that's Lord Baden-Powell. As I mentioned, it is the spirit of fellowship and unity that makes Scouting truly indispensable in the lives of young people around the world. Well, volunteerism is a big part of the Scouting movement as well. So I really enjoyed this conversation this morning with Mr. Mark Ainsley John. But to reach out to the Scouting movement, we can get more young people and adults participating, playing an active role, and hopefully the Scouting movement does get the support that is necessary in order for it to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for AM Prime. Thank you very much to my guests for joining me on the program this morning and for their contributions. And thank you, the viewer, for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I'm Keaton Shaw, wishing you a good day ahead, a productive one, a safe one indeed. And in all that we do, may we just make TNT a bit sweeter. Our small contributions go a long way. Keep well. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available
a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next in stuff. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country, and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering